The mind is the ruler of the soul. It should remain unstirred by agitations of the flesh, gentle and violent ones alike, not mingling with them, but fencing itself off and keeping those feelings in their place. When they make their way into your thoughts through the sympathetic link between mind and body, don't try to resist the sensation. The sensation is natural, but don't let the mind start in with judgments, calling it good or bad. This right here is my favorite book of all time, hands down, hands up. Do whatever you want with your hands. This is the greatest book that I have read thus far in my life. And I can't overstate how much of a deep psychological impact this book has had on me throughout my journey so far. And what you're looking at is a book that has stood the test of time. It was written by Marcus Aurelius, a man who was the emperor of Rome from the years 161 to 180 AD. A 19-year span that solidified him as the last of the 5 great emperors. A period of time in Roman history that saw incredible success and prosperity for the empire. And on top of this, he was the epitome of what it meant to be a Stoic. He was a living example of what Plato called the philosopher king. A ruler who possesses both love of wisdom as well as intelligence, reliability, and a willingness to live a simple life. And because of this, Marcus has become arguably the most famous Stoic philosopher of all time. The man was a true example of someone we could all strive to be like, regardless of if we follow Stoicism or not. He was simply a good man, a good human being. So that all being said, what makes this book so impactful? Well, for starters, it's not really a book in the sense of a normal book that you might pick up at any bookstore or online, or maybe an audiobook like on Audible. It's a journal. It's something that he wrote to himself, and it's like a diary. And he never actually wanted to publish it. It was only after he passed away that whoever found it decided and realized that there was a lot of really, really good, important information in this book, in these pages, and that they needed to share this with the world. And what makes this such a powerful book is that it's raw, it's deep. Because he never intended to share it with the world, it's a direct look into the mind of Marcus, of someone who really strived to live a Stoic life. Now, if you're planning on reading it, as I'm assuming that you are because you're watching this video right now, just understand that, again, because it's a journal, it's a diary, it's not something that you can or really should read in one sitting. It's something that you should take time. You have to let the passages in this book take root. And what you find by reading these passages is that Marcus really did try, sometimes he really struggled to follow these Stoic teachings in the Stoic philosophy. And one of the key tenets of Stoicism that we find in this book is this idea that you can't control anything but yourself and your perception. So you can't control anything outside of you. You can't control the weather. You can't control other people. You can't control events that happen. You can't control so much of your life. All you can control is yourself, your perspective, your thoughts on the situations that you find yourself in, your thoughts about yourself, your thoughts about other people, your thoughts about the weather, your thoughts about the events that are going on around you. That is all that you can control. And because most of everything is out of your control, what we find in Stoicism and what we find in this journal, this diary that Marcus wrote to himself, is the idea that you should let go. And it's really a waste of time, a waste of energy to worry about things that are out of your control. And ultimately, all that is going to do is increase your stress levels and decrease your happiness in life. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Now, in our modern times, this idea of letting go of things that are out of your control, I would say, is a completely juxtaposed one. Unless you consider yourself a modern day Stoic and you follow Stoicism, most people really want to control everything in their lives. They want to control their kids. They want to control the situations that are going on around them. They want to control their time. We use all these apps and the internet and our phones to try to control things that are going on in our lives and make our lives, quote unquote, easier. But all this does is it ends up leaving us feeling weak, like we don't have control over things. And this ultimately leads to an increase in stress. But by reading the passages in this book and even throughout Stoicism, if we begin to implement this idea that, hey, all I can control is myself, my thoughts, my perspective on whatever's going on around me. I can't control these outside events. If we really start to implement that, we start to gain a sense of strength, a sense of energy, because we understand that, hey, here's these things that I control, and here's these things that I don't control. And so there's no need to stress about them. It's almost like a weight is lifted off of your chest. You can just let go because these things are out of your control. They're out of your possession. You can't do anything about it. So sit back and relax. All that you can control is yourself, and it will actually end up leaving you feeling better and less stressed. And also within this book, we see quotes like this. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for? The things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm. So were you born to feel nice instead of doing things and experiencing them? Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants, the spiders and bees going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best as they can? And you're not willing to do your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands? You don't love yourself enough, or you'd love your nature too and what it demands of you. So another idea that we see Marcus talk about in his meditations and really in Stoicism is this idea of following a virtuous life, of being a good person, of doing the right thing, of being a hard worker and doing what you should be doing, and to not complain about those things that you need to do. And within Stoicism, what we find are these 4 cardinal virtues. Now, we're not going to go into depth about them, but what they are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Now, prudence essentially means wisdom, the ability to know the difference between right and wrong, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Justice is a state of obedience to laws, obedience to nature, to being a good citizen of the world. Fortitude is the idea of being brave and calm in the face of danger, even in death. And temperance is the idea of self-discipline and the notion of living a moderate life. Not chasing pleasure, but rather being happy with everyday life. And this idea of living a virtuous life comes up a lot in meditations. Not to live as if you have endless years ahead of you. Death overshadows you. While you're alive and able, be good. Which leads me to the last point that I want to make, and it's really the overall tone of meditations. And that is that we are all going to die someday. As you read throughout this book, you really start to see how much death was at the forefront of Marcus's mind. Now, there might be a few reasons for this. I know during Marcus's time as emperor, there was a plague, there were massive floods, and he was out battling a lot. But in addition to that, Stoicism taught this idea of focusing on death every day. In fact, they have a little saying called Memento Mori. And Memento Mori is essentially an object or something that reminds you of death. So a lot of times what you may have seen maybe in movies or shows is in someone's office, they'll have a skull. This is essentially a Memento Mori, an object that reminds you that, hey, your time here on earth will not last forever. You will die one day. And there's a couple reasons why the Stoics talked about death so much and why Marcus wrote about it so much in his meditations. One is because to give you this perspective that, hey, you're not going to be here forever. You need to go out there and do what you need to do to live a virtuous life, to be a good person, and to get done what the world has assigned for you to get done, to be a hard worker. And another reason is to give you this perspective and understanding that you and I and everyone else, we play such a tiny, tiny role in this thing called life here on earth. And so we shouldn't walk around like we're all high and mighty and we're so great when we are going to die like everyone else before us and everyone else after us. And finally, the last reason why Stoics and Marcus talked and thought so much about death is because death is just a part of life. It's not bad, quote unquote. There's no bad or good to it. It just is. It's a part of life. Just like we need to eat and we need to drink and we need to work. We need to all die at some point. So it's not something that we should fear. Now, I know in our modern times, this might seem really harsh and morbid and really hard to wrap our heads around, but you have to put yourself in the perspective of someone who lived during that time, during the time of Rome. Life was harsh. People died much more often than people do nowadays. But even still, whether we lived back then or we live now, we all have an end to this thing we call life. And so it's not something that we should just pretend like it's so far away and like it's not going to happen to us, because it is. It's going to happen to everyone, and we should all accept it, because unfortunately we can't do anything about it. And again, this goes back to that idea of all you can control is yourself and your perspective. You can't control outside events. You can't control death, unfortunately. All you can control is your perspective on it. Remember, matter, how tiny your share of it. Time, how brief and fleeting your allotment of it. Fate, how small of a role you play in it. Now, those are just some of the ideas that Marcus touches on within his book. And there's a ton more incredible information in here on how to live a good life and how to be happy with your life. And it's something that I would highly, highly recommend for everyone to read. But especially if you're someone or you know someone who's dealing with things like depression or anxiety or maybe just general sadness, or they're just lost in life and trying to figure out how to navigate their lives, this book is incredibly powerful. And that's truly what drew me towards this book and towards Stoicism in general, because I'd been going through so much in my life, going through bouts of depression, through anxiety, through losing several family members, and Stoicism and Marcus and his meditations incredibly helped me to grow as a person, to understand life much more, and to learn to accept things as they are. So I highly recommend it. And I'll leave you with this one final quote. To be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it.